What would you do if the person you trusted most betrayed you and pushed you into the abyss? Ethan Carter had everything: a thriving family business, wealth, and a promising future. But in one devastating moment, he lost it all. His closest confidant, Logan Mitchell, the man he once considered a brother, stood over him with cold indifference as he sent him plummeting down a steep cliff. Logan believed Ethan was dead, but someone else had witnessed everything. And that someone wasn't human. Leon, Ethan's loyal German shepherd, had been by his side since the accident that left him in a wheelchair. The dog had seen it all: the heated argument, Logan's cruel smirk, and the moment his master was sent over the edge. The storm raged above, lightning splitting the night sky as Ethan tumbled, his scream lost in the howling wind. The impact was brutal. Rocks tore into his body as he crashed against the unforgiving terrain. Pain exploded through him, knocking the air from his lungs. The taste of blood filled his mouth. His vision blurred, and for a fleeting moment, he wondered if this was the end. Above, Logan peered down from the cliff's edge, rain streaming down his face. He waited for movement. Nothing, just the relentless storm swallowing the evidence of his crime. "What a shame," Logan muttered, shaking his head. Then, without another glance, he turned and disappeared into the night. Below, barely clinging to consciousness, Ethan fought to stay awake. His body screamed in agony. His fingers twitched, but he couldn't move. Cold seeped into his bones, his breath shallow and ragged. Then, through the deafening storm, he heard it, a bark. Leon. Through the rain and jagged rocks, the dog made his way down the treacherous terrain. His golden-black fur was slick against his body, his amber eyes locked onto Ethan, filled with unwavering loyalty and determination. "Leon." Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, but the dog heard him. Leon whined, nudging Ethan's face with his nose, licking the blood from his cheek. He barked again, as if demanding his master to stay awake. Despite the pain, despite the darkness pulling him under, Ethan knew one thing: his best friend wasn't going to let him die tonight. Pain, that was the first thing Ethan Carter felt when consciousness clawed its way back to him. A searing, bone-deep agony that made every breath feel like a knife slicing through his ribs. His body was battered, bruised, and broken. His head pounded from where it had struck the jagged rocks. Rain lashed against his face, mixing with the blood trickling down his temple. For a moment, he thought he was dead. Then he heard it, a bark. Sharp. Urgent. Leon. The German shepherd moved swiftly across the uneven terrain, navigating the slick stones and loose dirt with remarkable precision. His fur, soaked from the storm, clung to his muscular frame as he reached Ethan's crumpled body. His amber eyes flickered with desperation. His wet nose nudged against Ethan's cheek. "Leon." Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, raw and weak. Leon barked again, a deep, commanding sound, as if urging his master to stay awake. His tail flicked anxiously, his instincts screaming at him to do something, anything, to save the man who had raised him. Ethan tried to move. Pain flared like wildfire through his limbs, forcing a choked groan from his lips. His arms trembled as he attempted to push himself up, but his body refused to cooperate. His mind, however, remained sharp. He knew one thing: if he stayed here, he would die. Leon seemed to understand this too. His gaze darted across the darkened canyon, searching for a way out. The nearest slope was too steep, the cliffside slick with rain and mud. But a few yards away, there was a path, narrow, treacherous, but possible. The dog sprang into action. He grabbed onto Ethan's sleeve with his powerful jaws and began to pull. Inch by agonizing inch. Ethan gritted his teeth, the pain nearly unbearable, but he forced himself to endure it. Every second counted. For what felt like an eternity, Leon dragged him across the uneven ground, his muscles straining, his breathing heavy. The storm raged on, but the dog never wavered. Then, movement. A faint light flickered in the distance, barely visible through the downpour. A house. A barn. Someone was out there. Leon saw it too. His ears perked. His tail stiffened. He let out a fierce, commanding bark before turning and sprinting toward the light, his paws kicking up mud as he disappeared into the dark. Ethan's body sagged against the cold ground, the exhaustion weighing him down. His vision blurred at the edges, but he forced himself to stay awake. He couldn't die here. Not yet. Somewhere beyond the rain and wind, Leon ran like his life depended on it. Because it did. Because Ethan's did. And Leon wasn't going to fail him. The wind howled through the Texas countryside, whipping through the fields like a restless spirit. Rain lashed against Leon's fur as he tore through the night, his paws kicking up mud and gravel. He didn't stop. He didn't slow. Somewhere behind him, Ethan lay broken and bleeding, barely clinging to life. Leon's instincts screamed at him to turn back, to stay by his master's side, but he knew better. If he wanted to save Ethan, he had to find help. His nose twitched, picking up faint traces of smoke, hay, and horses through the downpour. A ranch. He pushed himself harder, his chest burning from the exertion. Then, lights up ahead. A large wooden house stood at the edge of the field, its porch light flickering through the storm. Beyond it, a barn loomed in the distance, the scent of damp wood and livestock thick in the air. Leon sprinted straight for the front door. Inside, Henry Dawson sat in his worn leather chair, sipping a late-night whiskey while his wife, Eleanor, knitted beside the fireplace. The storm rattled the windows, but after decades of Texas weather, they paid it no mind. Then came the barking. Loud. Desperate. Insistent. Henry's head snapped up. "What the hell?" he muttered, pushing himself up from his chair. Eleanor frowned, setting her knitting aside. "Is that a dog?" The barking continued. Relentless. Henry grabbed his rifle from the wall and moved toward the door. As soon as he cracked it open, Leon pushed his way inside, soaking wet and wild-eyed. "Jesus!" Henry exclaimed, stepping back. The German shepherd whined and lunged at his pant leg, tugging hard before releasing him to bark again. Eleanor stood, her hands covering her mouth. "That's Ethan Carter's dog." Henry's eyes widened. He knew Ethan. Everyone in these parts did. And if his dog was here, looking like he'd been through hell, something was very, very wrong. Without hesitation, Henry grabbed his raincoat. "Eleanor, get blankets and the medical kit. I'm taking the horses." Leon didn't wait. He turned and bolted back into the storm, knowing they were following. Minutes later, Henry and his ranch hand, Jake Miller, thundered across the field on horseback, their lanterns cutting through the darkness. Leon ran ahead, his legs aching, but he would not stop. Finally, he reached the rocky ledge where Ethan had fallen. He barked furiously, circling the injured man as Henry and Jake leapt from their saddles. "Dear God," Henry murmured at the sight of Ethan, his body battered, his face pale, blood soaking his torn shirt. Jake crouched down, pressing 2 fingers to Ethan's throat. "He's alive," he said, but his voice was tight. "Barely." Henry turned to Leon, who sat at Ethan's side, chest heaving, eyes locked on them. "You did good, boy," Henry said grimly. "Now let's get him home before it's too late." The world faded in and out, a hazy blur of pain and darkness. Ethan Carter barely clung to consciousness, drifting between the waking world and the pull of oblivion. He could feel the weight of his own broken body, the burning ache in his ribs, the sharp sting of cuts along his arms and face. Somewhere in the distance, voices murmured, low, urgent. Then warmth. Not the biting chill of the storm. Not the cold, unforgiving ground. But heat, pressing against his skin, wrapping around him like a shield. A fire. The faint scent of wood smoke filled his lungs, replacing the metallic tang of blood. Ethan groaned. His throat was dry, raw, like he had swallowed sandpaper. A shadow moved beside him, then a voice. "Easy, son. You're safe now." Ethan forced his heavy eyelids open. The light was blinding at first, but as his vision adjusted, he found himself staring at a familiar face. Henry Dawson. The old rancher sat beside the bed, his sharp eyes studying him with a mix of relief and concern. "Where?" Ethan's voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You're at my ranch," Henry answered, pouring water from a pitcher into a tin cup. "You've been out for damn near 2 days." 2 days. The realization sent a jolt of panic through Ethan's battered body. He tried to sit up, but a sharp, searing pain shot through his ribs, pinning him in place. A second later, a warm, wet nose pressed against his arm. Ethan turned his head. "Leon." The German shepherd whined softly, his amber eyes filled with relief and devotion. His tail thumped against the floor as he nudged Ethan's arm, as if to say, "I never left you." A lump formed in Ethan's throat. He lifted a weak hand, running his fingers through Leon's damp fur. "You saved me," he murmured. Leon let out a soft bark, his tail wagging just slightly. Henry leaned forward. "Not just him. We got to you just in time. But you were in bad shape. Broken ribs, a concussion, dehydration. If Leon hadn't found us when he did—" Henry shook his head. "Well, let's just say that Mutt deserves a damn medal." Ethan swallowed hard, piecing together everything that had happened. The cliff. The betrayal. Logan's face, twisted in contempt as he sent him over the edge. His heart pounded. "Logan," he rasped. Henry's expression darkened. "That bastard thought he got away with it. The whole town thinks you're dead. He's been giving interviews, playing the grieving friend, talking about how you struggled with your depression after the accident. Even had the nerve to throw a memorial service." Ethan's blood boiled. "That son of a—" "What about the documents?" he asked, every ounce of energy he had left going into that question. "The evidence." "My lawyer." Henry exhaled. "Gone. The lawyer's office was broken into the night you disappeared. Any files you sent him, erased." Logan covered his tracks well. Ethan clenched his fists. Pain flared through his hands, but he didn't care. This wasn't the end of this. He wouldn't let Logan win. He turned to Henry, his jaw set in determination. "I need to go back." Henry snorted. "Like hell you do. You can barely lift your damn head, let alone go running back into the lion's den." "I don't have a choice," Ethan growled, the fire in his chest burning hotter than the pain in his ribs. "He thinks I'm dead. That gives me an advantage. I just need proof. Something, anything, to expose him." Henry studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. "There might be a way," he admitted. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Henry leaned back in his chair. "Your old housekeeper, Margaret Collins. She worked for your family for decades. She knows things, where your father kept important records, hidden safes. Things Logan might have overlooked. If anyone still has evidence against him, it's her." Ethan's breath hitched. Margaret. If she was still alive, she was in danger. His hands trembled as he gritted his teeth. "I need to find her." Henry hesitated. Then, with a reluctant sigh, he nodded. "All right, kid. But we do this smart. No reckless moves. You get better first." His eyes darkened. "And then we bury Logan Mitchell." Ethan's gaze flickered to Leon, who sat beside him, ears perked, ready for whatever came next. They weren't just going to survive. They were going to win.